Welcome to the ABCs of Preschool, the show that covers all things from parenting to childcare. And we're going to get real about how not just to survive, but thrive in the early years. I'm your host, Miss Amber. I'm a mom of 5 and early childhood expert with over 25 years in the industry. Whether you're a parent, an educator, or just curious about early childhood education, this podcast is for you. Each week, we're going to dive into what life looks like raising little ones, with special guests, industry experts, and personal stories that will leave you inspired and empowered. Get ready to explore, imagine, and discover the beautifully messy that comes with these magical years. Buckle up, because thriving during the early years is a wild and rewarding ride. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the ABCs of Preschool. I'm your host, Miss Amber. This is going to be a different episode. It's been on my heart for a minute, and I don't know. I wasn't sure how to do this, if I should do this, talk about all this, but it just feels like it's been on my heart and I'm supposed to share, and I don't know why. And maybe you'll listen and maybe you won't, but I just wanted to share really kind of who I am in my faith and my journey through faith. The last 2 years, I've talked a lot lately, especially about gratitude, really speaking out what you want in life, living with intention, and my work that I've been doing on changing my story, especially in the sense of my health, because I have been very sick on and off for a lot of my life. Even when I was a kid, I was sick a lot. When I was a teenager, I was sick a lot. When I was a young adult, I was sick a lot. And I really have changed that. And part of that was really researching the blue zone. I'll do a podcast. So this podcast is really just a general podcast episode today. But I really started diving into the blue zone and the research behind why people in these specific areas around the world live until they're like past 100 and they're like very capable cognitively and everything. And so I was walking, that's part of it, and community is part of it, food is part of it. But another one really was faith. If you go look at the research, part of their longevity is having faith in their life. And it really kind of got me to thinking, and that even though was really spiritual and prayed and have my beliefs, I wasn't faith as in like a community. I wasn't going back to church. I was raised in church. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is kind of my journey of faith and the grace that I feel like has been given me over my life. And I just wanted to share that, like who I am a little bit more. And like I was on a podcast interview last night and the host was like, what's your values? What's your morals? What do you stand for? And I just kind of wanted to share my journey. And yeah. And like I said, I feel like I was supposed to be doing this and I was just nervous. And it's something I don't promote a lot. It's something I don't really speak of a lot because I used to speak about it all the time. So I was raised in a very Pentecostal Christian church. Like Pentecostal, if you're not familiar, it's like people falling on the ground and speaking in tongues, it's called. Like it's very wild in many people's views. It's like very wild. Some may even say it's like cultish. So I was raised in an Assemblies of God Pentecostal church. And as a child, I was like that good girl, right? Like for some reason, faith, when I was being raised, I'm not sure if it was really how I was raised or how I've interpreted it. I took it on as I had to be perfect all the time. And as a young child, that is a really huge responsibility to have on your shoulders. And I was really raised, and I believe like I had to be perfect every day. And I had to be such a good girl every day, because if I sinned, if I messed up, I was going to go to hell, like literally. And I'm not joking. I'm not trying to be dramatic, but that's literally my childhood. I've always been a writer. I've always loved to write in journals, and I have journal after journal after journal in a box. And I would journal to Jesus. Like I was a very God-fearing, Jesus-loving child from very early on through elementary school through junior high, I was the girl in junior high. This is crazy as I think about it. I was the girl, my mom got me a shirt. I don't even know if I should say this, but I'll just say this. I was the girl that would wear Jesus Christian t-shirts to school at a very public. I grew up in my schools I went to in elementary, especially my junior high and first high school I went to was in very rough areas. So I grew up kind of in the hood a little bit, you can say. But I was the white girl showing up to school with anti abortion t shirts. My parents took me to anti abortion rallies. I would be the 14-year-old child standing there with anti abortion signs. I was an extremist, like you can say. Like there was no hot or cold with me. Like I was firmly and boldly a Christian girl and feared. Like I knew God loved me, but I also just had so much fear in me of messing up. So my childhood was always trying to be the best at everything and I always kind of equated that if I do good, be good, then I'll be loved. And like I said, I don't want to put blame on my parents. I'm not sure. It was just, and I think my brother was raised in the same household and he may have a different outlook. And I think he might have grown up with a different outlook. But for me, my personality, whatever it was about, was really fear based and a sense of had to be perfect all the time and always had to do good, be good to be loved. And so I was at church like Sunday twice a day, Wednesday for youth group. Like I was so involved in church. And then I went to a Christian high school. In my senior year, I was even chaplain of the school. On our senior trip, we went on a cruise to Mexico. The typical, actually, it's a booze cruise, the 4-day booze cruise from like the port of Long Beach in California. We did that for our Christian senior trip and all my friends were sneaking alcohol, of course, and having fun. And I like never had a drink of alcohol in my high school years. I never had sex. I was when I say I was the typical good girl, I was the typical good girl. Like it was crazy. And I think I actually came across too, looking back, I was probably really judgy of everybody who wasn't like me. And I felt like I was on a pedestal almost, but I got married really young. And I got married really young at 19. And I went on missions trip when I was 16 in high school to Mexico. And then again, when I was 18, I went to Africa and I freaking loved Africa. And I went preaching all around to others. And I met my ex-husband. Well, we went to the same church and then we went on a missions trip together and fell in love. Got married a year later. It was crazy, really fast. And I was the virgin on my wedding night. Like I'm telling you, I was the extremely Christian good girl trying to follow all the rules. Like I had to listen to Christian music only. I remember when I was a kid, my brother and I, we would turn on MTV because my parents had cable and we were not allowed to watch it. I wasn't allowed to listen to Michael Jackson or like Madonna. Like I had to like sneak all of that. I remember in 8th grade, my friend, we got tickets for Free Willy, which was like PG maybe. And then we saw The Good Son, which is rated R. I could not even, we went to see the rated R movie and snuck in the entire movie. I sat there so nervous, sick to my stomach, thinking that the rapture was going to happen. And if you don't know about the rapture and like Revelations in the Bible, it talks about like all of a sudden the Christians like disappear and go to heaven. And I was thinking the rapture is going to happen and I'm going to be left behind. Like that was my childhood. That was my everything, was always like, Jesus, please forgive me. I sinned today. And I would say it over and over all day because I was so scared that if I didn't ask for something to be forgiven, I would not go to heaven. And it messed me up a lot in many ways of just even some of my core beliefs that I've tried to get rid of years from now. But it just brought more of a fear onto me and a striving for perfectionism where nobody's perfect. That is like impossible, right? And we are all human. And so I got married, and years down the road, left it all, my marriage was really rough and hard, and I was hiding a lot of things behind closed doors. And my husband left the church, and I was just distraught about that. And then ended up leaving the church and kind of threw everything that I believed out the freaking window. And I lived that way for a really long time. And I actually raised my kids. We went to church a little bit when they were younger, but we didn't raise them with a Christian background. So for many years, I still believed in God and I had faith and I had spirituality, but I think it happened when I became a mom. I remember looking at my beautiful boy that I just had, thinking like, how can I tell this little boy to live this very specific way, very narrow, specific way? And if he dodged it or fell off that path in any way, he would be damned to hell. Like, I don't get that. And so I struggled with that. And so it really kept me in the church. Like, I had separation from my faith for a really long time. And I had to walk my own path. And I think I had to experience a lot of things in my life. At 31, I got cancer. And through all the hard in my life, I felt God with me. I still felt the presence of God in my life through everything, even though I wasn't in church. And like I said, I never disbelieved in God. I always had faith there was something more, there was such a higher power beyond me, because for me to process all the hard things that I had gone through, this really traumatic divorce, the cancer, I had to have a higher power. And I always held on to that. But it wasn't until one morning, March 8th of 2018, that I woke up and I was cooking breakfast. It was like 6 o'clock in the morning, 6:15, 6:30-ish, 6:40, early in the morning, that I woke up and I started cooking breakfast for three of my kids. And I cannot explain it. I cannot tell you why, but I had such an incredible, intense feeling that I needed to put on praise and worship music. And praise and worship music, if you're not familiar, is like Christian music or music of the faith. It talks about God, it talks about Jesus. It's very uplifting. I had not listened to praise and worship music probably for 7 or 8 years prior to that morning. But the presence, like, it was so strong in me. I remember cooking and like stirring the eggs, and I was thinking, why the hell should I be putting on praise and worship music? Like, what is going on? And but that feeling, it was like almost like a voice. It would not go away. I could not understand it, and I was so annoyed. But I finally was like, Alexa, freaking put on praise and worship music. And I remember one of the songs that played was I Can Only Imagine. And I couldn't understand it, but I just listened because this feeling would not go away. So I fed my kids, I got them ready. I was in the car for like over an hour and 15 minutes, dropping them off at multiple schools. And as soon as I dropped my daughter off, so it was probably like an hour that had passed, that feeling still was there about listening to praise and worship music. And I just couldn't understand it, but I did it. I finally was like, what the hell is going on? And I put it back on in the car and I drove down, got into my office at one of my schools, and I was there maybe 10 minutes, just 10 minutes maybe. And I got a phone call from my dad, and my dad rarely calls me. So I was like, that's weird. And he said, you need to come right away. Your mom's passed. And I remember thinking, let me back up a minute. This was a Thursday morning. On that Monday, my mom went into surgery for a regular hysterectomy. It was her first ever really surgery ever in her life. She was 62 and she had surgery on Monday morning. And I remember that Monday I was at work again in my office. And I remember feeling like I needed to be there when she woke up. Like it was strong. It was a strong feeling. And I listened to that feeling on that Monday. So I left work early and I went to the hospital, and she was super surprised to see me there. But I had that strange sense of I needed to be there when she woke up from surgery. And I remember the nurses were like, okay, go walk to the bathroom and you're going to go home. And I've had this surgery and I was in the hospital for 2 days. And I was like, she can't get up right now. She just had this surgery. It's like not an easy surgery. So I remember arguing with the nurses, but I ended up leaving and she was released and she went home around 5 o'clock that night. And later that afternoon, another feeling was like, I need to get her a care package. Like, I have to go see her again. Like, it was like nagging me. So I went to the store and I brought her a care package. And I went over and she was talking and she was fine sitting in her chair. She looked great. And I brought her like crackers and just stuff for after surgery. And I said, okay, I'll talk to you in a few days. Feel better. I love you. And fast forward to that Thursday morning. And when my dad called me and he said, your mom has passed. And I thought, I was like, well, Dad, if she passed out, call an ambulance. I call an ambulance. And he's like, no, Amber, you need to come right now. And I remember getting in my car, and they only lived about 25 minutes away from my work, driving there thinking, is she dead? Like, is he saying passed away? I think he's trying to tell me she passed away. And I didn't know what I was going to find, but I knew what I was going to find. It was like one of those where I had 20 minutes to race over to figure out what was I going to walk into. And when I got there, the police were there and a police officer met me at the front door. And I remember telling him, I said, before I went in the house, is she dead? And he said, yes, I'm sorry. And then I remember walking into the house and seeing my mom in her chair, not breathing and gone. And my dad just like kind of pacing, like, she was okay. We were just talking. We were just talking this morning. And she told me to go back to bed. And if you've lost someone close, there's just so many emotions that go through your head. And I didn't even really think about it because like a chaplain showed up. They had to take her body. Like, I had to start calling family. But it wasn't until later that day or maybe that night until I like took a bath and I remember just sobbing that I remembered the praise and worship music. My mom was a huge believer in God and Jesus. And that's how I was raised. And she loved praise and worship music. She was always singing in the choir. And it didn't hit me until that night. Like, her passing was around that time, early in the morning. And I couldn't explain it. And I think that was part of where I started to kind of go back towards God and Jesus and my childhood faith, but in a very different way. But that was the start of it because I could not explain all of that. I just couldn't explain it. Like, it was so bizarre to me. But the only way I could explain it was God. It was my mom. It was her passing. And it was a reminder that God is with us even in the hard. And during that time my mom passed, I was going through a very traumatic divorce. Like, I was divorced, but it was harder than my breast cancer. It was such a dark period in my life. It was those bathroom floor moments multiple times, curled up into a ball, thinking, I don't know if I can go another day. I don't know if I can handle any more of this life. And it was the hardest, darkest, loneliest time in my life, the 2 years prior to her passing away. And her death was so pivotal for me because it's when I started to say, okay, God, I can't do life on my own anymore. I really need your help because I can't carry myself and I can't carry all of this hurt anymore. And I feel like such a broken person that I almost think that closing my eyes is better than living in this world anymore. And that's how broken that I was. And through the first year my mom passed, it's funny, I felt her, she was closer to me than she was even alive. And I just felt the presence of God just kind of start to carry me. And I started to then say, take this burden and I'm going to believe that you've got me. And just because we believe in God or if we have faith doesn't mean we're not going to have the hard times, because we are. But I think going through the hard times with that higher power and that faith and that belief, it can carry us so much more with faith. And I think emotionally and mentally and spiritually. And it was just the trigger and the start of me coming back to my childhood faith, but in a different way, because it took me she's been gone for 6 years. But through those 6 years, I've met the love of my life, who we share a faith and we pray and we both believe in God. And I've seen really amazing things happen in my life, like very amazing intentional, beautiful things that I only prayed about for years quietly that have come to pass. And the last 2 years, actually the last year, I guess, too, like I started slowly going back to church because I didn't want my dad to be alone at church. And so I would go with him. And then my husband and I recently started going back to church. And then I recently watched The Chosen on Netflix. And if you haven't seen The Chosen, I highly recommend it because I think it kind of like showed Jesus Christ in just a different light and how real of a human being and a person he truly was. And he came to this world for the people that were hurting and broken, and like his disciples, his follow like his original disciples, I mean, they like have some shady past, you know? They were probably not what people would think he would pick. But I think that's the beautiful thing about faith and Jesus, and you don't have to be perfect. Like that whole idea of me having to do good and be good and have to be perfect. I have to just show up and say, thank you for my life. And I'm going to trust that you've got me and you're walking alongside this path with me. And whether you believe or not, I feel like God is a God of love and grace and forgiveness and passion. And that's what I believe in now. That is what my journey has turned into. And it's so beautiful. And I have a prayer journal and I pray for friends. And I don't really talk about it a lot because I think my younger years, I was so vocal, but in such a judgy way, unfortunately. And I think that so many people are turned off by faith or religion because people come across like on a pedestal. And that's why I really encourage you to watch The Chosen, because it's not how Jesus came to this world. Like he did not come to be on a pedestal, and we shouldn't be walking around the earth on a pedestal. We need to be coming alongside our friends and being there if they're having like lost a baby or lost a loved one, bring them a meal. Be there to support them and say, I'm so sorry. Like that is what God's love is loving the people around us, accepting them for who they are, loving them, giving grace and kindness. And that's where my life has been now. And it's so intentional and it's so beautiful. And part of the blue zone and part of being healthy and longevity is having faith and community. And I'm back at church now and I love it. And I'm still a wallflower. I'm not very active and I don't know if I will be active. But I am thankful for the journey and I'm thankful for God's faithfulness and I'm excited for the future. And I think God is a God of love, not a God that wants perfection. And I'm thankful to be 46 years old now, learning this for the first time and really feeling this. And I just wanted to share because especially if you grew up in such hardcore religion and in a box, I encourage you to watch The Chosen. It just kind of reopened my eyes a little bit of the love and kindness and grace and God meeting you right where you are. Have a beautiful week. This is Miss Amber with the ABCs of Preschool.
Thanks for listening. I appreciate you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to hear this podcast. Make sure to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss the next episode. For more information on how to work with me, Miss Amber, visit me at thelovingstartway.com or follow me on Insta at thelovingstartway.